was born December 12, 1745 in New York City. He was born into a wealthy family of government officials of Dutch descent. Jay spent his childhood in Rye, New York, where he was educated by his mother until he was 8. Then he was sent to study under an Anglican priest, returning after 3 years to homeschooling with his mother. He later attended King's College, now known as Columbia University. Entering at the age of 14, he graduated in 1764 and became a law clerk for a prominent lawyer. John Jay was admitted to the bar of New York in 1768 and he established his own law office in 1771. In 1774, Jay became secretary of the New York Committee of Correspondence, and then elected to serve as a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congress. He served on New York's Committee of 60 and then was elected to the Third New York Provincial Congress. The Provincial Congress elected Jay the Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court of Judicature on May 8, 1777. The Continental Congress then turned to Jay, electing him as president from December of 1778 to September of 1779. On September 27, 1779, he was appointed minister to Spain, leading Jay to become Foreign Affairs Secretary under the Articles of Confederation. George Washington appointed Jay as the Supreme Court's first Chief Justice in 1789. Jay resigned his seat on the Supreme Court to take office as the Governor of New York from 1795 to 1801. He then refused reappointment to the Supreme Court. Chisholm v. Georgia was a case in which the court ruled that the states were under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and the federal government. It's considered the first U.S. Supreme Court case of impact as it led to the adoption of the 11th Amendment. Georgia v. Brailsford was an early United States Supreme Court case holding that the state's debts during the American Revolution could be recovered by bondholders. The court concluded that the sequestration law did not transfer the debt interest to the state. In 1801, John Jay retired to his farm in Bedford, New York, where he died at the age of 83. Jay is remembered for serving his country as a judge for years, also as a constitutional advocate and diplomat.
Brown v. Board of Education was a landmark case in America's history that shifted the way our public school system is established today. The case originated in Topeka, Kansas. It began on December 9, 1952, and finished on May 17, 1954. For 2 long years, the fight for civil rights in public schools went on. In 1950 and 1951, lawsuits were filed in Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and the District of Columbia on behalf of Black elementary school students who attended legally segregated schools. The plaintiff, named Oliver Brown, along with 5 other families, filed a class action lawsuit against the Board of Education. Oliver Brown filed on behalf of his daughter, Linda Brown, who was denied entrance to Topeka's all-white elementary schools. The NAACP and Thurgood Marshall took the case and represented them in the trial. The Supreme Court justice who had the case was Ed Warren. Linda Brown, who was an 8-year-old African-American girl, had been denied permission to attend an elementary school only 5 blocks from her home in Topeka, Kansas. School officials refused to register her at the nearby school, assigning her instead to a school for non-white students that was more than 20 blocks from her home. Linda Brown's parents filed a lawsuit to force the school to admit her. Her father, Oliver Brown, claimed that schools for black children were not equal to what white children had at their schools, and that segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The case was heard as a combination of 6 class action lawsuits filed in 5 different states by the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, on behalf of African American elementary and high school students who had been denied admission to all white public schools. The Browns thought that segregated school systems and worse conditions for all black schools were a violation of the 14th Amendment and decided to take the matter to their federal court. The federal district court decided that segregation in schools wasn't fair for black students, but because both black and white schools had similar buildings, teachers, and transportation, segregation was legal. The Browns appealed their case to the Supreme Court, stating that even if the facilities of both schools were similar, segregated schools could never be equal to one another. On May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The 14th Amendment prohibits the states from denying equal protection of the laws to any person within their jurisdiction. The ruling stated that racial segregation in public educational facilities was unconstitutional, and school segregation was then banned.